Hello and welcome to Behind the Scenes podcast for Out of Frame. I'm your host, Sean Malone, creator of Out of Frame, creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education. Here with me today, as usual, is Paul Nelson, our Out of Frame Shorts editor and social media manager. But we have a special guest for you all today, Austin Wintory, good friend, here to replace Jen Mafasante while she drives all the way across the country to Utah. Austin, how you doing, my man?
I'm glad to know I'm your second-rate Jen.
No.
Happy to fill the shoes for the time being.
Austin, I wanted to invite on the show specifically because we are talking today about a pair of very music-themed movies. Austin, for those who don't super know who he is a composer. Very successful composer of video games and films, television. Some of the games, we've had him on. Other things that we've done with Fee, including Entrepreneur Week, which we did, a couple months ago. But he scored Assassin's Creed Syndicate, Journey, which is one of my all-time favorite games, Banner Saga, Flow. Ton of really cool games Austin scored over the years. A good movie that actually a buddy of ours produced, our buddy Joe Greasis produced, called A Little Help, which I also really like. Which I think, Austin, you and I think I went to the premiere of that, or maybe I went to the premiere of Grace, and I saw Joe Greasis there, and I had no idea that Joe knew you, which was like the weirdest.
Joe. For the life of me, actually, I think I met him through my neighbor in the apartment complex that I moved to when I came to LA. A very LA story, I guess, that I met. There was a neighbor who, there was a husband wife who were. She was an actress, and he was. I'm blanking now what he did. He worked for like Johnson & Johnson or something, or Procter & Gamble, or I can't remember what he did. I'm totally blanking, but they were also big nerdy gamers and movie people. And I think Joe was a friend of hers because, we met. And then, I don't know, a few years later, he made that film, A Little Help. One of those, it's such a sorely underseen film.
It's a really nice film. For those who haven't seen it, stars Jenna Fisher. Kind of a woman at the end of her wits, basically, getting divorced. Kind of a adult. It's like a more adult themed movie. It's not something that kids are really going to understand. I think some of the themes in it, but really solid.
It's very adult from the standpoint that it's about a woman reaching that turning point where she's basically she's never really invested her life in developing a lot of skills because she was always really attractive and everyone kind of handed her everything. And now she's turning this corner where that's starting to go away, and she's wondering what to do with her life. And then she's got this 10-year-old kid she's trying desperately to figure out how to kind of bond with. And it's a funny movie, but it's also it's actually very real. And the director Michael Whitehorn, the guy that created sitcom King of Queens. It was his first time ever directing a feature.
Chris O'Donnell also in that movie, now that I recall, as well. But
short role.
So anyway, welcome to the show, man. I appreciate you being here today. Though we're going to talk about some music themed movies. As I said, for the main episode, we want to talk about Pixar's Soul, which just came out over the holidays. Pixar had been working on it for, I think they wanted to release it at the beginning of last year, and COVID and everything kind of got through that off and whatever. And then for our patrons and our Subscribe Star supporters, we're going to do a bonus episode on a movie that a lot of you guys probably haven't heard of. It's a documentary from 2008, I think, distributed in 2010, called Thunder Soul, which we'll get into later. Once we get into the bonus section, you guys are going to totally understand how it connects to Soul and why I wanted to bring it up. It's a really cool documentary that we'll get into after the break. But Before we get to Soul, I guess I should also say one of the reasons why we're doing this um, in like remote. I mean, obviously Austin was always going to be remote because he's in LA, but Paul and I are doing this remote today because interesting development in my life is that my family is all experiencing COVID right now, so we're all like in it at the moment. I think we're probably a week, 10 days out at this point, so I think we're kind of towards the end of whatever would be, I don't know, contagious or whatever, but it's been kind of an interesting experience. I actually tested negative, and I don't know for sure if I've had it. Obviously there's false negatives, false positives, stuff like that. But my wife tested positive. She lost her sense of taste. She she got really tired for a couple days, but and I've had a cough for a little while. But that's kind of the worst of it, really. Her there's other issues with her dad. Her parents are living with us right now, so that was kind of a bigger fear. But for the most part, everybody's generally fine as far as like the COVID aspect of things goes. But it's been a pretty weird experience. I mean, certainly my wife's description of like losing her sense of taste was really, it's really odd, and it's been pretty annoying for her. But on the other end, it's also been super mild. So I don't know. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to complain about. We're all in really good health. But that said, we didn't want to go to the studio because, we just want to play it a little bit safe and make sure that we're not, Paul's got kids and stuff, and we don't want to set off another chain of another family being sick. But pretty mild, honestly. So, but that's where we are. How you doing, Paul? By the way, sorry.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Still COVID free. It's been a lot of lockdowns this year for me, but so we've been really busy at Fee, and this is not much. This part is just I'm going to plug FeeCon, Sean. So here we go. FeeCon 2021. It's happening. It's going to be June 17th, and registration should be open by the time this podcast comes out. So head on over to feecon.org. Is that correct, Sean?
Yeah, feecon.org. We're planning a mostly in-person event where we've got some contingencies for doing a digital version, stuff like that. But the plan is to do everything in person. Even if we end up doing like a remote version, we're going to do it more TED Talk style. We'll have our primary speakers come out to Atlanta. We'll shoot it really, really, really nice and make it look good and have it be a really good experience for everybody. But right now we're planning to be here in Atlanta in person, and hopefully Austin is actually going to join us. Austin and Angela, hopefully.
It was certainly a lovely time last time. So, it's one of those, as someone in the game industry has a lot of conventions and things like that as well throughout the year, both like professional events that are kind of more in the spirit of FeeCon, and then also obviously like Comic-Con type events. And God, it's killing me the last thing I went to, the last big event was one of those, is called PAX, the Penny Arcade Expo in Boston.
Yeah.
It was one of those where there were a lot of people wearing masks and stuff because it was all over China, but it hadn't really. I think maybe the cases were known in Washington State, so it was that little window where it was like, maybe this will be an isolated event or not. No one really knows, but everybody felt comfortable enough to go to a convention. But seemingly days later, it was like, let's just dial up the apocalypsometer because all hell is breaking loose. So it's real. And crazy to think now that we're barreling towards that having been a year ago. That was last February, I think.
Yeah. It's been super nuts. Oh man. So with all that said, let's get into it a little bit. I want to talk about Soul because first of all, Pixar, I've been a big Pixar fan for a long time. Certainly a big Brad Bird fan, as you guys should be able to tell here with my shirt. But this was Pete Docter has been with he's one of Pixar's brain trust. He's one of Pixar's sort of OG directors. Excuse me. Sorry, I am going to cough a little bit throughout this. This has just been kind of my life for the last couple of weeks. But like Pete Docter directed Monsters Inc. and he directed Up and Inside Out. And this movie actually, I think, shares a lot with Inside Out. There's a lot of overlap, I think, between kind of existing in a really abstract world of emotions and feelings and things like that, which Inside Out does really, really well. I was a little surprised, I will say, to find that I don't really feel like it's very much of a kid's movie. I think it would be hard for most kids to really get what what Soul is really about in a lot of ways. It's really heavy in a lot of areas, but on the surface, it is about a jazz musician, a pianist named Joe, who has been kind of failing at having a performing career, and instead has kind of defaulted to a backup of substitute teaching. Now he's on the precipice of a big decision in his life. The decision is either does he accept a full-time position at the school and become a full-time band director, or he gets an opportunity, hopefully, with in this case, a famous saxophonist at this world's equivalent of the Blue Note, New York. I actually don't even remember what it was called. It's Blue something, but it's basically the Blue Note, which is a huge jazz club in New York City. And he gets the gig. So here he is on the precipice of major life change. And then, as you've seen in the trailers, he falls into a manhole and dies, which is, all dogs go to heaven, like dark place to start this movie. But before we get into like the rest of the plot and stuff, I'd love to get general reactions. Like, Paul, what was your thought? Like, did you watch this with your kids? Like, what did they get out of it? Also, I'd love to hear.
No, didn't watch it with the kids. I agree with you. This is definitely not a kids movie. I don't even know if 12-year-olds would really even be able to grasp it. But I thoroughly enjoyed this. I think this was, as far as animation, one of the better depictions of humans, just how they look on screen in Pixar movies, and just this kind of computer graphics representation that I've ever seen. I kind of want to get out of the way of this conversation because we got two great musicians. I only played trumpet up through high school, so not exactly up there with you guys, but just in general, I loved it. Fun is a weird, but it was fun. It was kind of like, it took a really depressing idea and made it very approachable, and really had a nice message.
Yeah. Austin, what were your thoughts?
It's funny because until Ratatouille came out, Monsters Inc. was my champion Pixar film. To me, that was just a perfect film, and so I really liked Up, and I really loved Inside Out. I loved the idea of the big takeaway being, life is gray. Life exists between the kind of primary colors of these unrealistic emotions of happy and sad, and I was like, what a great take, and especially what a thing to say to younger kids. Like, life is not going to be all about happy and sad, but everything in between, and everything is going to be both at once. And so I went into this movie thinking, all right, well, Pete Docter's clearly, a brilliant filmmaker, and Pixar is also famous for how they won't rush movies out. They'll sit on it for 10 years if they have to, before it's right. And yet somehow this one to me felt severely undercooked. The more I've thought about it, the more it's kind of like, how there's always kind of like a multi-phase digestion on things like this, where you've got, the moment you're kind of bewitched by it, and it sort of dazzles you with all of its shiny objects. And so you might come out of it in the immediate aftermath going, wow, that was really awesome. But then as it digests, you start to find all the problems. I've had the opposite as well before, where, you watch a movie and I'm initially like, I don't know, but then I can't stop thinking about it. And I realize it was kind of a slow burn into brilliance, and it's actually amazing. And I just couldn't really see it in the immediate. But this has definitely been one of those that the more I've thought about it, I just find myself with issue after issue after issue. And I want to love it so much. But I'm like, honestly, because Pixar is a victim of their own brilliance, where because they've made 20 of the best ever, this is, I honestly think, one of the weakest films they've ever done, only because they've made truly some of the best films ever made, and to them a weak movie would be the best most filmmakers could hope for in a lifetime still. But I'm not crazy about it.
So I probably fall in between the two here. There are things about this movie. So I've watched it twice now, because I watched it maybe on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve or something. My wife and I were in Maryland, dealing with a whole other very stressful ordeal, and we would just go home back to our hotel at night, and we'd watch movies, and Soul just come out, so we watched that. I think it was probably Christmas Day, but I enjoyed it, but I didn't really connect with it when I first watched it. I actually, Austin, liked it a little bit more the second time I watched it. But I also agree that there's things that are missing from it, and it doesn't rank in the top 10 even, probably, for me in the realm of Pixar. Now, it's not, I wouldn't put it down with a Cars 3 or a Good Dinosaur or something like that exactly, but it's not, it's definitely not my favorite Pixar movie. That said, there are some things that Pixar always does that they did in this from a musician standpoint that I actually really appreciate. Right out of the gate, it starts with the Disney music branding. When you wish upon a star being performed by just a terrible middle school band, right? And it just sounds grating and awful, and it's funny, and it's kind of a perfect way in. But once you actually get into the room, you see Joe Gardner conducting. He is conducting correctly, which is a weird pet peeve of mine, actually. It's something that you'll see in movies all the time. People just wave their hands around there's no connection between whatever their motions are and what's happening in the music or in the score. And it is actually correct. And then what's that?
Well, yeah, sorry, there's a little bit of a lag. I don't mean to cut you off too aggressively, but I John Baptiste was the guy providing all the kind of jazz half of the score and the songs, and they actually did performance capture on his hands, and so all of Joe's playing is actually him, all accurate. And on top of that, a friend of mine posted on Facebook that some friend of theirs, as part of the LA musician community, was also done. They did performance capture when the girl comes who wants to play trombone. That's also all those slide positions and everything are also and all the trombonists were like that.
I know all that stuff is dead on. The saxophone player that Joe goes to play with has some really, typically sort of bebop runs and stuff that she does that are all also right. And there's palm mutes and there's all kinds of stuff that are very, very subtle little saxophone techniques that you just don't see. You don't even see it in live action movies, right? Let alone animated. And doing that in an animated movie takes so much work and so much attention to detail. And it's so hard to do that you just skip it. I mean, it's like trying to animate. I mean, even just you look at bad animation just of people's lips moving, and lips moving is the core thing that you need to animate all the time in these kinds of movies. So for Pixar to put that level of attention to detail in it,
I feel like it's a forgivable thing to skip over as well, considering that 99% of the audience has no idea that you don't play a violin that way, or piano. You hear these high notes on the piano, and yet they're clearly down on the lower end of the piano. There's a million things that the audience just doesn't pick up on, and so you forgive them. It's like the old story where Neil deGrasse Tyson lost his mind when Titanic, she's lying on the debris in the sky, and it's the wrong stars for that period, like that time of the year and for that part of the world. And Neil deGrasse Tyson saw James Cameron years later and said, I can't believe you got the stars wrong for your obsession of getting everything right in this movie. You got the stars wrong. And Cameron said something like, imagine how much more money we would have made if we'd gotten those stars right. And it's like, I forgive them for not caring about those details, but I applaud them for caring.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that if you're gonna dive in, I mean, which it's sort of what Pixar wants to do, right? If you're gonna dive in that deeply to a subject matter, and in this case, it's music performance really is the majority of the subject matter. If you're gonna dive that deep into it, if you're gonna spend 2 or 3 years on it, like it seems like you should take that extra effort and get all of that stuff right. But so I applaud the movie for that. I like some aspects of the big picture of the idea of the movie, especially the idea. One of the things I kind of wrote down from the movie that I think is particularly interesting thematically is about the idea that your spark, like the thing that like you just get excited about in life, doesn't necessarily have to be the thing that you do for a living, doesn't necessarily have to be the thing that is your purpose in life to do. I think that's a pretty interesting conversation to have. But I also think that especially towards the back half of the movie, it kind of falls apart because Joe doesn't really figure out what his purpose is. Even though that's kind of where we're headed at the beginning of the movie. To get back to the plot a little bit, like when Joe dies, his soul, gets on this big fretboard to the sky, and he realizes that he's headed up to heaven. He doesn't want to go, so he runs back the other direction. Through, kind of hijinks, he finds himself in a completely different area, and it's the preborn souls, the unborn souls, which, by the way, opens up a whole other world of kind of awkward conversation that we could be having here. But it's souls that haven't yet gone to Earth yet, haven't yet, experienced life, as a living human or whatever. And so the job of the mentors in this area is to help the uncreated souls figure out what their personalities are and what their purpose is and what their spark is. Well, not their purpose, right? What is their spark? Once they have that, then they can go inhabit a body, I guess, and become, grow up and have a life. But, Joe's whole thing is like, he doesn't feel like he's ever really lived. He doesn't feel like he's ever gotten to do the thing that he was put on Earth to do, because he's never found the success as a musician that he thought he was going to have. And you'd think that like the rest of the movie was really going to be about that, and was really going to be about him figuring out why, like, again, kind of talking about Mr. Holland's opus a little bit, like, is maybe he realized that he was actually put on Earth to be a teacher, right? Maybe that was the move, and he thought he was going to be a musician, or he's going to be a performer, but in fact, he was going to be a music teacher and he was going to inspire people. But that's not, they never really get there. So even now, I don't really know who Joe is to some extent, which is where I feel like the movie.
Isn't they end with that note, like in their defense, isn't that kind of spoilers, obviously, but isn't that the kind of final conclusion of the movie is to say, what are you going to do? And there's sort of a celebration of, I don't really know, as long as I'm living my life fully and presently and appreciatively, it's okay to not know, which that was one of the few things I really did like about the film. But
I just don't think I just don't think that is as clearly defined as I think. Like it's sort of tacked on at the very end. Like, well, hey, I get another chance. What are you going to do? I don't know. I'm just going to try to live. Okay, well, good message. But like, they didn't build up to it. I don't know, Paul. What were you?
Yeah, I think I disagree. I think his whole with 2022 with the soul, his when they switched bodies, when there was a Freaky Friday moment, it was learning that life is about your connections with the people that you care about. And it's not about finding your spark. It's about being there. It's about making that connection with other souls. And I thought that was really powerful, especially in the time period that we're living through right now, where that connection is strained to the extreme, and it really highlights the importance of those relationships. And without those relationships, there's no way he could, fulfill his dream of playing that, performing that gig. And I thought him saying, "I don't know," was perfect, because there's how many people in this world feel just like him. Like, I have no, like, for me personally, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like I have a good grasp. I like what I do, but like, what was I put on this earth for? The more life experience I get is to fulfill those connections with other people that I care about. And I really resonated with that part of it.
I like that. I will say I think the best parts of the movie are that sort of body swap section. Really, I mean, I think most of the best parts of that movie are really about the moments where Joe gets to see his own life through somebody else's perspective, right? Because he's outside of it. Like, for, again, spoiling the plot here, like he and the unborn soul that he is supposed to mentor sort of go back down to earth together. Joe tries to cheat his way back to his body. She ends up in his body. He ends up in the body of a cat, and many hijinks ensue. And it's funny, and it's good. But I think to your point, Paul, I think the most poignant parts of it are really that, like, for me, it's especially the moment in the barbershop. It's a little bit also with his mom, but I think it's more the barbershop for me, because he goes to the barbershop and realizes, just because there's somebody else inhabiting his body, he realizes he's never actually taken the time to, like, all he's ever done is talk about himself. All he's ever done is talk about his needs and his dreams and his goals. And he's never even taken the time to get to know important information about his own friends, which I think is kind of a, like I said, I think it's the more poignant part of the movie to a large extent.
I just wish all of that was done with more delicacy or something, because it's one of those that when you talk about it, I kind of retcon it in my memory of it being more powerful than I remember it was, because it felt more like, okay, I've got 45 years of being a guy that is single-mindedly obsessed with music, and all I care about is this dream, and teaching represents this drag force on my inspiration in life, because it's me not doing what I want, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's like 5 seconds of, giving his mom the time of day, and the next thing you know, she, after seemingly, it sets up that she's been relentlessly, probably for his own good, trying to peel him off this path of obsessively caring about his dream. And then 4 seconds later, she's there cheering him on in the front row. And it was like, well, he's kind of a prop at that point then, because it feels like these characters are a mouthpiece for the message and not real people. And because I like, there's something intriguing about the idea that, he gets what he wants finally, and it's somehow not satisfying. Like, but it didn't fully commit to exploring that. But here was the thing, if I can back off 1 second and just zoom out a little bit, because the thing that actually kind of disturbed me about the film, the more I thought about it, was one of my favorite lines. I'm a fan of, not to become polarizing or anything with potential audience members, but I'm a Christopher Hitchens fan, and he was imperfect, but he was a wonderful orator. And one of my favorite little one-liners from him in one of his debates was that he said that he goes, "The thing I find particularly pernicious about the sort of doctrinal theology is that we are created sick and then commanded to be well." And I kind of feel like that's how this film set up the world, because it was basically like, we're going to assign you personality traits, and then we're going to put you in the world, and if you're not happy, it's somehow on you. And I was like, they explicitly show these kids being taken, these like unborn souls, to almost like personality training indoctrination buildings. And so Joe is theoretically a subject of that, and then he's put in the world, and basically it's like, you're not happy, well, you haven't found your spark, like you have these personality traits you had no say in, which is of course real. That's like true to real life. Like we are in a way just how we are, and we're some amalgam of hardwiring and a product of our environments and our upbringing and our community and all that sort of thing. But it's all things we had no say in. But then somehow there's something wrong with us if, like, we are aspirational and we are super ambitious and we do want to kind of raise our station or any of those kinds of things. And I was like, it's a kind of they kind of glance around it and they try to sort of move through it. But I said the world building and the message are actually taken at a closer look. It's actually kind of vile. The more I thought about it, I was like, I find it actually sort of twisted, but I know that I don't think I don't want to be uncharitable. I don't think that was sort of. I don't think they're making some very dark statement about the world, but I did find that the implications they built were a little bit pernicious.
Well, I think the implications of a lot of stuff in here aren't explored. That's probably what my overarching complaint is. Really, is just that, like, again, I made mention of it earlier, and I'm kind of joking about it a little bit, but like they have created a world where there are unborn souls, but they don't deal with and look, the movie doesn't have to get into abortion or anything like that, but the reality is it did very much set up the idea that, like, there is a soul that exists prior to, a baby being born, and that is, if you take that direction, like, that's an interesting place to go that you could explore. But there are all these other areas. I think, Austin, to your point, like they even make jokes about, well, here's this megalomaniac who's gonna, be a narcissist and be a horrible person or whatever. And it's like, it's a funny joke especially kind of as an adult, because you've interacted with people like that and stuff, and you're like, well, that's where that guy came from or whatever. But it also leaves it is a very dark place that it leaves sort of undealt with in a lot of ways, right? So you have to skip over a lot of that stuff and get back to the more surface level take on things, which is really just about a guy who's trying to figure out, where his life went wrong and how he can find meaning, and then to help this 22 character also find a spark and find meaning and find something about life that she wants to, that she thinks is worth living or whatever. And I like that aspect of it. It's just that I think that, like, there's an aspect of this all that just got a little bit out ahead of everybody, and that they didn't quite know how to tie together, didn't know how to pull it all back in some.
I read an interview with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, the Nine Inch Nails composers, which I remember when that news was announced a couple of years ago that Pixar had hired Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross to score in the film. I just thought, what the hell is Pixar making? So it was very
and they're making a jazz movie for some reason.
Well, and that was the other strange component to it. But they did a good job, but I saw an interview with them that I thought was actually telling as to why this film felt somehow less cohesive and tight, and everything that you're saying, a lot of kind of almost like our discussion of the idea is more emotional and compelling to me. Like, the film planted seeds, to its credit, for us to talk about, but the actual experience of watching the film didn't deliver on the kind of cathartic emotional delivery of those ideas to me the way that, like, Ratatouille does or WALL-E does or whatever. But the interview with the composers that I saw that gave me an insight as to why this might be the case is that they said that Trent Reznor said that they wrote enough music. The movie evolved so much while they were writing it that they basically wrote the equivalent of 6 complete film scores. And that gave me this clue that this thing underwent such mid-flight revision that the result is like this kind of like compendium of it's got little trace. I bet if you were to walk through all the various iterations of the script, you could actually see that there's hallmark signs of all the prior iterations in the finished film as well. So it has kind of like the battle scars of earlier paths that it was on, and that's why it maybe didn't fully click together in the end. I don't know,
well, that's one of those to me is because there are a lot of little bits in the film that I think are. Well, let me actually step back and say one of the things I actually really like about the film, and it's similar to how I feel about Inside Out, actually, is that I think it really, in some ways, really nails what it's like to experience certain things. So, like the way that it describes being in a state of flow, for example, if you're a performer, or like there's this Graham Norton plays this actually like a corner sign spinner who's just basically in a trance, and he's like operating in this like other dimension of sort of ethereal plane kind of thing, and he can kind of go in and out. But that feeling of what it's like to experience Csikszentmihalyi's flow, like if you ever read that book. But whatever. I mean, everybody's experienced that idea, right? Like everybody. Well, I don't know if everybody has, but I mean, everybody's heard of the idea of a flow state and being in that, and that is it is what it feels like. It feels like in the way that Joe Gardner, and they explore this throughout the film, because the little girl that he's teaching trombone to kind of gets in that state, and she loses her. She's kind of gets off into her own world and does a little trombone solo, and then everybody makes fun of her. And then Joe sits down at the piano. This is very, very, very beginning of the movie. Sits down at the piano and says, like, "Hey, don't make fun of her. Like, I didn't know what any of this was like until I went. My dad took me to a jazz club, and then he goes kind of off into a little daydream, and then he does it again when he finally gets a chance to audition for the gig that he wants to get, and that flow state is something that like." I think is highly connected to this idea of a spark, or finding your purpose, or finding something about the world that you connect with. But yet it's also kind of dropped. Like it's not.
Also, they threw out the most amazing idea that was so like provocative, where they say, being in that flow state where you're just in the zone and the world melts away and everything is just magical and you feel, this connection with the universe. The fact that they also said that is also a razor thin difference from being a lost soul that has disconnected from reality and is like almost like a damned wanderer in this sort of hellscape. Yeah. I was like, holy crap, what an amazing idea to say that this beautiful, powerful, incredible thing that like all artists especially aspire to, and you become addicted to that feeling, is also something very dangerous. And I thought, oh my God, I wish the whole movie was about that duality. Because that's where the director of Inside Out is really revealing himself as having directed Inside Out. Because you're like, man, what a cool idea. And they just like used it as like a plot device to be able to get back into that sort of sea of lost soul. Like it became almost like a mechanism more than an actual narrative thread, which I was heartbroken by, because I thought, what a truly courageous and bold thing to say, follow your dreams, live in the moment, but recognize that could be your undoing, and like, I really wish they went deeper with that.
Yeah. Well, I want to start wrapping up this part of the show. I don't know if there are final thoughts. I think we've covered a lot here. I would still recommend watching the movie. I mean, especially if you have Disney Plus already. For me, actually, I think it's worth watching. The music is genuinely really good throughout. There's a lot of really nice stuff in there.
Gorgeous. Visually, it's like drop dead gorgeous.
Yeah, and by the way, on second viewing, there were some things that I noticed about the lighting and the way that it treated different surfaces, just from a technical standpoint, that merged things that historically, any kind of computer animation would really struggle with, sand and water, and kind of making something in between a solid and a liquid and things like that. Not to mention all of the 2D stuff that they did with, I mean, all that was really with the Jerry's was really, really creative. And I think there's a lot there that was really enjoyable. But I agree with Austin in the sort of the final conclusion. I think that I think it's not going to be at the top tier for me of Pixar, certainly. And I think there were some missed opportunities. Paul, what were your final thoughts?
Yeah. So for me, this was a very enjoyable movie. I think the final takeaway for me is, like you guys, it's not cream of the crop Pixar, but that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. I think what I took away from it was slow down, enjoy the present, enjoy the leaves falling in the fall, enjoy the people around you, be with them, and good things will happen. So with that, that's what I have to say about that. So just, keep those connections alive, especially in this time period.
Out of curiosity, for my own calibration, what are your two, like if you had to pick, you're not, I won't hold you to it, but if I said, what's your top Pixar film, I'm just curious where each of you land on that.
Ratatouille for me, and probably the original Toy Story.
It's a tough one. The Incredibles actually probably made the most difference to me personally. It was a movie that I watched that made me want to write film music, and it made me want to work in film in a way that not that many movies have. It's just, there's something about it that just connected everything that I care about. All of the tropes and everything was super exciting. And I know Austin and I have talked about the score to that movie a bunch, and it is John Barry to the absolute, peak of what you could as an homage to John Barry, but it was perfect for that, for what that movie was and what it needed to be. And, and I might also say Ratatouille. I rewatched Inside Out last night, and Inside Out, it's up there for me as well. That would have, I think, had I not just rewatched that, I might not have placed it quite so highly. But yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And honestly, then, not too long ago, I've kind of gone back through the entirety of Toy Story, and every single one of those is good, which is insane. Like, I don't know how you do 4 movies. It is. I don't know how you do 4 in a row, and yet each one is.
After Toy Story 3 came out, it felt like, okay, someone has finally made truly the perfect trilogy. And then when they said they were making a 4th, I thought, oh man, now they've gone and blown it. Because how could you possibly add anything to the end of that story? And then really, I felt that way even through most of the movie. And then in the last 15 minutes, they stuck the landing, and I was like, holy crap. But yeah, the other one that I would throw out there, that after I was feeling so kind of dissatisfied with Soul, or I mean, there's so much to love about it. So it's not that it's a bad movie by any stretch, but I found myself wanting more. And I realized, Pixar kind of quietly put out another film this year that I didn't watch. And so I went back and watched it, which was Onward. And that really affected me. I loved that movie. I felt like, okay, this gave me everything. This had the emotional maturity of like saying you want something your whole life, and then when you come to that moment of recognizing maybe I have that chance to grab it, maybe it's not actually the right choice, and having the maturity to know the difference. And I was like, man, this is everything I wanted Soul to be, more or less, emotionally speaking. I couldn't recommend it more.
Onward's another movie that I rewatched. I watched and I was like, yeah, this is okay. And then I rewatched it and I was like, this is better than I gave it credit for. And I agree. I think that there are things that I wish, personally, I just wish Onward did a couple things a little bit differently. Most notably, like, I feel like they really should have given a little bit more thought to their mom in the entire movie because their mom, like, they didn't even care. They were like, oh, we'll get our dad back for the day. Who cares if mom is here for this? Which is like, come on, but as a brother story, it's beautiful. As a story about, boys and dads, it's a wonderful, wonderful story. So definitely support that as well. All right. I'm gonna wrap this part of the show here. For those who are not supporters of the show, this is the end, but we thank you. We appreciate everything, you guys are watching on Out of Frame. And in case you guys didn't know, we've opened up our Discord. So you can find that link on the newest episode of Out of Frame. We'll probably put that link out with this episode. Definitely make sure you subscribe to Out of Frame on YouTube, subscribe to this show on YouTube, also subscribe or, just check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everything, anywhere you can get a podcast, you can find the show here. And if you want to support the show a little bit more, join us on Patreon or Subscribestar, same perks either way. And one of those perks is that you get bonus episodes of the podcast. So for those who do subscribe, stick around and we'll see you in a few minutes. To everybody else, we will see you next time.